I'd like to welcome everybody to this lecture, Honorary Fellow Lecture and the Public Interest Week. I want to start out by thanking Tori Messina as well as Arlene Finkelstein for all the hard work that went into putting this week together. And I just want to, again, give them obviously, this week there are a lot of individual events, but in general, we're celebrating public interest, which means a lot of things in a lot of different contexts. I was struck this afternoon at lunch when we went around the room talking about the various public interest careers that people had pursued, all the way from Lou Ruley and Janet Scotland, who would spend an entire career in service of the public interest. And then you had somebody like David Richmond, who was at a large law firm, but had really spent an incredible amount of time committed in his extracurricular activities to serving the public interest. We're celebrating all of that today and this entire week. I actually firmly believe that human beings are hardwired, that we have this need, this obligation, this feeling to serve something greater than ourselves. And it really does give us a sense of what it means to be a human being and a purpose in our lives. And the legal profession, I think people who enter the legal profession should and do feel that particularly. And whatever we end up doing within that profession, I think we feel this need, this obligation to do something for the society at large. That's why we entered the legal profession in the first place. Now, I just came back from a 2-week trip in Asia, where I was visiting a whole series of individuals, both alumni and academics, government officials, members of the judiciary across Asia. And I met a lot of people who were, had significant careers, were very passionate about what they were doing. But there was one time that I met 3 people when I was in China that I will remember the rest of my life. I was in a city in China which will remain nameless. And I met in the back of a coffee shop with 3 individuals who had spent the last 15 years doing democracy work in China. They were pro-democracy, transparency in government. We sat in the back of the coffee shop because I think they were nervous to be seen with me. And they had a long-term view about the need for transparency in the government in China, the need to provide greater democracy, and as a result, to provide greater resources for the rural poor in China that are really in desperate shape. They had done this at great personal risk. They'd been visited several times by members of the government. We all know about various issues that have come up in China over the years. And I remember looking at these 3 people and wondering, where does this come from? And their English was, quite frankly, 2 of them really didn't speak English very well, and the other was broken. But you just had to look into the eyes of these people, and you understood their passion, that they were committing their entire life to this. My guess is it wasn't clear what the ultimate chance of success would be, and what the cost was. But it's clear they were willing to take this risk. They were willing to commit their lives to this. And it may be, quite frankly, that 20 years from now we'll look back at them as having been major engines of change in a very important part of the world. But the fact is, it was that passion and dedication that really, for me, came out across my entire trip, and it made me understand what it means to be in service of the public. Now, when I think of that passion, that's what I think about of today's honorary fellow who's speaking today. Because the fact of the matter is, she has committed her entire life to public service at various points at great risk, and giving up all sorts of other opportunities. As those of you who were at lunch today, she started out, coming out of law school with no real prospect of a job, and then ultimately understood that this is what she wanted to do. She wanted to serve a public interest career, and she was going to, in a sense, turn lemons into lemonade, that she was going to look for the best possible opportunities. She started out with the EEOC and then went to the ACLU and had a little bumps along the ride, along the way. But ultimately in 1979 decided that she was going to be an entrepreneur in every sense of the word by setting up the Alliance for Justice with, I believe, $5,000 and some furniture at that particular moment. And as they say, the rest is history. In 1985, she founded the Judicial Selection Project as part of that, and has really taken public interest to a new level, beyond simply representing individual clients or doing public impact litigation. She's really looked to affecting judicial selection, legislation, to look long-term at implementing a progressive vision within the United States. If you're going to ask people about her and her organization, you know, obviously it includes 90 member organizations at this point, but they would talk about her, Nan Aron, and her passion for what she does. Let me give you one quote from the Washington Post that perhaps says it all. She has built a reputation for never giving in, ever. And I should say, as somebody who receives more emails from Nan Aron than any other person in the world, I can say she never gives up in terms of what she's doing in terms of lobbying for her goals. I should also mention that no matter what the situation, no what the circumstance, you can see the same optimism and passion. What did she say at a graduation commencement address in 2006 when George Bush was president? She said, she told the graduating class, I want to make sure you realize what a wonderful time this is to graduate. Why? Because there's so many terrible things to fix. That's optimism, right? And of course, we asked her at lunch today about what's going on right now, and she said, what a wonderful time to enter public interest advocacy. There's so many possibilities at this point with the Obama administration. No matter what the situation, she has passion, she's willing to take the risk. And that's the type of personality that led somebody in 1979 with $5,000 and an idea to found the organization that has made so much of a difference. And it's that same passion that I think I saw in China last week of people who really see the long term and the long influence on their society. And that's what we honor here at Public Interest Week. We're honoring people like Nan Aron, people who've committed their entire lives to public interest, as well as people who might be working at a law firm, but part-time, spend an extraordinary amount of time pursuing public interest in other ways. And I can't think of anybody, Nan Aron, who's sort of a better symbol of that. So it really is an honor for me to introduce an outstanding advocate and somebody I think who can inspire everybody in the room, and somebody from whom, as I say, I receive more emails from than anyone else, Nan Aron.
Thank you. Boy, is Nan Aron getting a lot of trouble too. But thank you very much. And you all too can get a lot of emails from us if you sign on to our website and come look at it. Well, it's wonderful to be here. This is my second day. I have met many of the students and teachers and leaders of legal services and public interest groups. And I salute all the wonderful things going on at this law school. This place is really amazing. And of course we have Arlene and Tori who are really leading the way in public interest law. And of course, wonderful Dean Fitz. To prepare for coming here, I met with some of the law graduates from last year. And I could really sense the enthusiasm they felt for the school and what they did. In fact, one of the students, Aaron, who took, I think, Sarah Paletti's clinical class, talked about getting asylum for a family from Guatemala who was being persecuted back home. And that student, that graduate, Aaron, will really never forget that experience. So I know what happens here has a lasting impact on your lives, and it's very wonderful and very unique. I should just say parenthetically, when I went to law school, I was one of 7 women in my class. We didn't have clinical programs. I think we had one class called Women in the Law that was canceled after the first semester. Imagine that. So this is just a wonderful school and wonderful people, and I'm so glad to be here for a couple days. I have, as Dean Fitz has said, loved my career and my work in public interest law, and I certainly wouldn't trade 1 minute of it away. I noticed in looking at Penn and where students go on, about half of you guys go on to practice at big firms. I think about 1/4 of you go to government work at the local, state, and federal levels, and about 5% pursue careers in public interest law. So I think my mandate today is to convince those of you, although you look like a pretty convinced group already, convince some of you to think about the wonderful careers that are available in public interest law. As I said at lunch today, I've done it since 1973 when I graduated from law school. And as I mentioned earlier, even now when I'm leaving at the end of a long, hard day, I'm taking the subway in DC, and I'll inevitably know someone in that subway, and generally speaking, given what I do, the people I know are lawyers in town at big firms, and I'll say to them, hey, how are you? How you doing? Things going well? And they'll kind of shuffle their feet, and they'll look down, and they'll look up and say, well, you know, I'm looking for my retirement place. Could be a lake, could be a mountain, could be the ocean, could be the whatever. But generally speaking, they talk about retirement. And then I'll say, well, what are you doing? What's going on? What kind of cases are you involved in? And again, they'll look up, they'll look down, they'll shuffle, and eventually they'll talk about the one public interest case that they've been involved in. Even if it was involvement 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it's the one thing that was most satisfying to them during their careers. And I'm not sure they say it just because they know I'm involved in public interest law, but because it really has meant something to them in their lives. I thought I'd start with a few kind of rules of thumb for me in terms of public interest law. I thought about things that I thought were absolutely hard and fast rules when I graduated law school, and some have proven to be right and some haven't. One of the things that I thought when I graduated law school is I had to do litigation. I had to be a lawyer who was out there bringing cases, drawing up complaints, interrogatories. And one of the things I've realized, and I think it's more common now than it was when I graduated law school, the judges on the federal courts, principally, have been appointed by presidents who, generally speaking, put competent, open-minded, fair-minded people on the federal bench. But over the past 20 or so years, that's not the case. And therefore, lawyers have had to be versatile and turn to other strategies: lobbying, involvement in rulemaking before administrative bodies, regulatory bodies, public education, public relations, getting the message out through all kinds of means. So basically the practice of law today is not simply doing litigation, which is what I thought when I graduated, but it encompasses in the public interest law world so many more strategies than I ever imagined existed when I got out of school in the 70s. Two, for me, opportunities don't just appear in cities on the East Coast or San Francisco or Chicago, but given the realities of today and the dearth of public interest jobs, it's really incumbent upon all of us to think about cities that aren't necessarily the popular major metropolises of the country, but you have to have the flexibility to go to cities that you never dreamt you might go to. And I can tell you, if you're doing work you like, you can have a wonderful experience, which can be a jumping off point at some level to go to then a city that you really want to be in. We don't always get our first choices. I certainly didn't get my first choice. I wanted very much to have a job in legal services, having done legal services and legal aid work for 3 years during law school. And then all of a sudden I found myself with a job in the federal government. And while it was daunting for me to work in a big bureaucracy with several levels of bureaucrats over me, I had an amazing experience. I got to know some wonderful civil rights lawyers. I got to be in federal court, which doing work in the federal government enabled us quickly to get into court as opposed to a law firm, which, as some of you know, might take years to get into federal court. So for me, being in an agency was a terrific experience. And not only that, I had a wonderful first supervisor. I never thought that I would pick a job based on the supervision I would get, but it turned out for me, having someone, again, who would take a look at my brief, and it was a little bit unnerving the first time he took my first draft of a brief and walked in my office and tore it into several different pieces, but I certainly learned how to write a brief. So having good supervision, no matter where you are, is just a wonderful thing to have happen. Ongoing relationships with people are very important, no matter where you are. Meeting people, networking, as you all know, the real trick of getting a job is reaching out, calling people, being an advocate, but accepting and respecting all the people in the various chains of command. Teamwork in the law is really, really important. And along those lines, I'll tell you a little story about Bill Bradley. Anyone remember Bill Bradley? A couple of you. Bill Bradley was a former senator from New Jersey, an amazing basketball player, a Rhodes Scholar. And Bill Bradley ran for president years ago. And at one point, we actually assumed he was going to be president. So one day, Bill Bradley shows up at a banquet. He's about to give a speech. And he beckons the waiter over and he says, "I'd like some butter." So the waiter puts some butter on his plate. And Bradley says, "I'd like another pat of butter." And the waiter says, "I'm sorry, 1 pat per person is enough." And when the MC of the event sees what's happening, he dashes over to the waiter. He says, "What are you doing? This is Bill Bradley. Pro basketball, pro this, Rhodes Scholar, former senator running for president. Don't you know who he is?" And the waiter says, "Well, maybe you don't know who I am." And the MC says, "Well, maybe I don't." And he says, "Well, I'm the guy who controls the butter. We all need each other in this world, and we certainly need a little bit of team in moving ahead. So, what other things about public interest law? This is my rule of thumb, and now, as you can imagine, raising money for public interest law has gotten much, much harder, particularly during an Obama administration, when our funders think that, oh, everything is hunky-dory for public interest lawyers, so what do they need money? My rule of thumb is no is just a precursor to yes. When you're turned down, and this is for money, for a job, for anything else, really, I am such a believer in this. Just imagine, you gotta work, and it might take years to turn that no into yes, but my experience is that is really very, very possible. And two other things. One, good ideas are worth the risks. Guys are coming out of law school and you're saying, whoa, there are a limited number of fellowships. Government, well, there's a hiring freeze in government. Pro bono at law firms, forget about it these days. There is an opportunity to think about forming your own organization. You don't need $1 million from the Ford Foundation to do it. My motto always is, think big, but start small. I started, as the dean said, with a grant of $5,000. I cried a lot. That was not a lot of money, even in 1979. But it's doable. And if I can do it, you all can do it. Starting organizations, identifying a need, getting some people together, figuring out a way to incorporate is very, very doable. And finally, I would say public interest law, civil rights law, is certainly not for the faint of heart, and which I assume is why you're all here. No one ever, remember this book and movie, no one ever promised me a rose garden? Well, no one ever said this area would be easy to pursue. And I thought about it over the weekend when I picked up my New York Times. I think it was Saturday morning. And there I see that the Texas State School Board, did any of you read this article? Has been taken over by a group of ultra-conservatives. And after all these years of trying to get school boards around the country to support the study of civil rights, women's rights, civil liberties, all of a sudden the school board in Texas is taken over by a bunch of ultra-conservatives. And what are they pushing? They're pushing, and these reforms actually went through the study of creationism, throwing out Darwin and evolution. They're pushing the study of incorporating materials about the Black Panthers and violence, along with the studies of how the civil rights movement evolved and got started. They are throwing out courses that are supportive of Latino movements. They have totally changed the curriculum in the state of Texas after years of trying to push very good reforms. So there's always the fight, there's always the challenge, and it never goes away. And for you all, you are in the best time of your life to be doing this work. You are the vanguard. I'm sure that many of you got involved in the election. Maybe some of you for McCain, probably more of you for Obama. But this is really the time to make change, to get in there. But I think that Martin Luther King was only 26 years old when the Montgomery School bus boycott got going. Who would have thought that would build into a civil rights movement. The bar, I'm sure you've been told, is eminently passable. I would like to tell you, I, for one, lived out and survived my worst nightmare. The night before my bar exam, let us just say I stayed up a little bit too late, 5 o'clock in the morning. A little partying, a little eating, a little running around the hotel. Needless to say, I may be the only person I've ever met that overslept the morning of my bar exam and went running into the exam a half hour late. I had to beg the people administering the test to allow me to take it. I lived to survive and pass that damn exam. So if I can do it, all of you can do it. So think about your careers. Don't get tied up in bar exams and law firms. The world is out there, and it's a wonderful world to practice public interest law. Now, what are the kinds of things that I think about on the subway and on the metro going home? One of the things I think about that we're working on at the Alliance for Justice is, will John Yoo and Jay Bybee get the investigation they deserve to get? You know who John Yoo and Jay Bybee are, I assume. These are the lawyers, along with Steve Bradbury, who came to Washington, D.C. John Yoo is from the West Coast. Jay Bybee, of all people, came from Nevada. Jay Bybee came to the Bush administration asking for a judgeship to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And what did John Ashcroft say to Jay Bybee? He said, go over and work in the Office of Legal Counsel. John Yoo was there. Steve Bradbury later was there. And these three lawyers were asked by David Addington and Dick Cheney's office to write memorandum authorizing and sanctioning torture by CIA officials. Dick Cheney so much admitted it on one of the Sunday shows a couple of weeks ago. You know, it reminds me of something that a very astute constitutional scholar by the name of Jay Leno said a few years ago. When Iraq was writing its constitution, he said, why don't we just give them ours? It was written by a lot of smart guys. It's worked well for 200 years, and we aren't using it anymore. And I thought a lot about what Jay Leno had to say over these years. Well, as you may know, the Office of Professional Responsibility, during the Bush years, wrote a report, found that these three lawyers at the Justice Department engaged in unethical conduct at the Office of Legal Counsel. That report went to Michael Mukasey. Remember Michael Mukasey, Attorney General during Bush years? And Michael Mukasey took a look at the report and he sent it back. And he sent it back so that each of these three lawyers could provide additional justifications for their actions. That was 5 years ago. A few weeks ago, on a late Friday night, about 9 o'clock, the Justice Department rolled out and released the report by the Office of Professional Responsibility. And unfortunately, in a shameful action, the head of that office, a guy named David Margolis, changed the results, the outcome of that recommendation. And he watered down the recommendation from sending those three names to their bar associations for consideration of unethical conduct. And instead he said these three lawyers engaged in poor judgment and did not make any recommendations at all. For all of us in this room, that should not be the end of this story. We know that other lawyers engaged in wrote memos during the period of time from 2002 to 2006 and 7. And it's incumbent upon us, as law students, as lawyers, as law teachers, to keep pressing the Justice Department to make sure that what happened at the Office of Legal Counsel never happens again, and to hold those lawyers accountable. It's critically important that we keep an eye on that. Now, Barack Obama has said we can only look forward, we can't look backward. But those of us in this room are smart enough to know that you need to look backward in order to figure out how to restore justice and how to move forward. So we've got to keep the pressure on Eric Holder, and we've got to make sure that we dig a little deeper. I have to tell you, it's a little personal for me, because we at Alliance for Justice, one of the things we do is monitor the selection of federal judges. And I remember when Jay Bybee's name came to the United States Senate, nominated by the Bush administration. And after all, Jay Bybee came to Washington seeking a judgeship, worked at the Office of Legal Counsel, authored and signed off on these memos, and for that was elevated for a seat on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And here we are, sitting at the Alliance, and all of a sudden Jay Bybee, who's worked at the Office of Legal Counsel, is nominated for a seat on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He had previously been a law school teacher in Nevada, very well liked by his students. And so we said to, at that time, the Senate Judiciary Committee, you know, a judgeship, a federal judgeship is life tenured. You don't go for a judgeship for just 4 years, 8 years. It's not like a presidential term. It's not like 6 years, a senatorial term. It is a lifetime tenured position. The Senate deserves to know what Jay Bybee did when he was in the Office of Legal Counsel. And at that point, the Senate said, well, we'll ask him what he did. And so he came up before his hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was asked what he did, and he said, you know, I really don't feel it's necessary to comment or to share what I did at the Office of Legal Counsel. And we at Alliance for Justice said, well, you know what? It shouldn't be, a federal judgeship should not be automatic. And we asked the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we asked the full Senate not to approve his judgeship until he talked about what he did at OLC. We got one other senator to go along with us, and that senator was none other than Ted Kennedy, who went down to the well of the Senate and spoke out and said, this shouldn't happen. Well, I think Jay Bybee is soon going to be called to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. And one of the things I want Jay Bybee to talk about is what he knew at the time and when he was up for this judgeship, and why he hid from the American public the work he had done to sanction torture. So there is much we can do, and why is it important for us? It's important for us because what we did to those detainees, and you know, hundreds of detainees lost their lives because of torture. It's a stain on our country, and it's really a stain on the legal profession, and we've got to keep at it and make sure that we uncover all the facts. All right, what else do I think about on that subway? Well, we think there's going to be another Supreme Court nomination. There's been a lot of hubbub in Washington because of a piece that Jeff Toobin, who writes for the New Yorker, recently released on Monday, after he conducted a very lengthy interview with Justice Stevens. And it looks like Stevens will most likely announce his resignation sometime in April, about the same time that we learned that Justice Souter was stepping down. And I should tell you that when there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court, it's a wonderful opportunity for people like us at Alliance for Justice who all of a sudden can use a Supreme Court vacancy to talk about the importance of judgeships and Supreme Court nominations. It's interesting because we conduct focus groups and polls for the members of for the Democrats every year or two. And in fact, one of the places where we routinely come to do these focus groups is in Westchester, Pennsylvania. You all would be amazed. Focus groups, you get about 40 people in a room. And you start out by trying to gauge how much knowledge people have before you start asking questions. Generally speaking, you start by saying, how many justices are there on the Supreme Court? And I will tell you, in a room of 40 people, maybe one or two know that there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. It's amazing. And then we usually ask, so name a justice on the Supreme Court. And if you're my age, a little bit over 50, maybe nearing 60 and slightly over, people will know the name of Clarence Thomas, because many of us lived through that very rocky, searing hearing of Clarence Thomas's to the Supreme Court. Sometimes people might know, although I doubt now, the name Sandra Day O'Connor just because she was the first woman on the Supreme Court. But generally speaking, people's knowledge about the court and who is on the court is very, very limited. So Supreme Court vacancies for us are wonderful opportunities to kind of educate people about why courts are so important. So as you can imagine, we're doing a little bit of gearing up at the moment. Reminds me of a story. During the Nixon administration, word got to the Nixon White House that Thurgood Marshall was very, very ill, gravely ill. And of course, Richard Nixon was delighted because maybe he could put someone else on the Supreme Court. So he sends one of his deputy attorney generals over to Thurgood Marshall's hospital room. The guy knocks on the door, doesn't hear anything, walks in his hospital room. There he sees Thurgood Marshall lying in bed, eyes closed. The guy walks very slowly and quietly up to Thurgood Marshall's bed. And all of a sudden, Marshall opens one of his eyes and he says, "Not yet." So, who knows what Stevens is saying at the moment. He's being very coy about when he's going to step down. But obviously, for us, it's a huge, huge opportunity. Because appointing and replacing Stevens, he leaves some very big shoes. He's been a leader on the Supreme Court, master tactician, strategist, outspoken, and I'd like to say a leading liberal, but I would say at the moment there really aren't any liberals on the Supreme Court, although he comes closer than anyone else. What would we like? We would love to be able to replace the lost voices of a Marshall or a Brennan. We'd love to have a leader on that court who can begin to take on John Roberts, who can change the conversation away from limiting our rights and protections to one that offers a very robust defense of civil rights, women's rights, First Amendment. So we're waiting and seeing. going to be a very difficult choice, I think, for Barack Obama. In my heart of hearts, I have to think, being a constitutional scholar and teacher, that he would want to put the best person up. There are clearly pressures and forces in the White House that are telling the president, don't make a fight, don't pick a progressive, go easy, pick someone who's got some Republican support already. Don't make this a fight. My view of all this is, given what we have seen from Congress, that no matter who Barack Obama puts up for the Supreme Court, there will be a huge fight. I can't imagine that Barack Obama's nominee will garner even one Republican senatorial endorsement. It's just not going to happen. And why is that? Because Republicans, as we've seen from the past year and a half, care passionately about who becomes a judge. They talk about it a lot. The first thing George Bush did when he was elected president is he held this amazing, no, I don't want to say amazing. You never credit your enemy. He held a press conference in the Rose Garden where he introduced 13, I'm saying 13 Court of Appeals nominees to the country. And by golly, he got almost every single one. He got 99% of his nominees through the Senate. This president got 2 Court of Appeals nominees through his first year. And he is struggling to get the remaining Court of Appeals nominees through the Senate now. I was amazed. Last week, a nominee by the name of Barbara Keenan to a seat on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, nominated months and months ago last year, sailed through the Senate Judiciary Committee, very conservative record, no Republican opposition in the Senate Judiciary Committee, finds herself on the floor of the Senate where she sat, filibustered, for 6 months. No one knows who placed the hold on her nomination, and yet she sat for 6 months. Just last week, she was confirmed by the Senate 99-0. So Republicans are engaging in really obstructionism just for the sake of obstructionism. So will Barack Obama's candidate get any Republican endorsements? I don't think so. And no matter who it is, Republicans will stage a fight. And why is that? Because not only did they care passionately about it, but because Republicans use judgeships to galvanize the ultra-conservative base of the Republican Party. So this summer should be wild and woolly. Please log on to our website. We're going to have one of your students working with us at Alliance for Justice, and we can use all the help we can get to promote the candidacy of whoever is nominated. So I want to leave some time for questions. I hope you have them. Our working motto at Alliance for Justice really goes back to what happened during the FDR's presidency, where it's been told time and time again he was meeting with a group of activists who were asking him to do something. And he was very fond of saying, God bless you. I like what you're doing. I agree with what you're doing. Now make me do it. And therefore, I think as law students, law professors, practitioners, we've got to help the Obama administration do what it can to promote justice, get wonderful judges and justices, hold some of these lawyers accountable, and support legal services and do what we can to protect and defend this wonderful Constitution of ours. So thank you so much. I salute all of what you all are doing, and would love to take any questions in the remaining time allowed. Thank you very much.